Hello, hope you're doing well today. Today we are talking about sponsorships with the sport organization. So this is chapter 12. Here we go. So these are our objectives. We're going to talk about and define and distinguish the different levels of sponsorship, primarily here in the United States, and discover how to uncover possible sponsors and who's responsible for making the decisions and determining what a good sponsorship fit might be, as well as understanding how to obtain sponsorships for large and small events and writing a sponsorship proposal letter, creating that sponsorship agreement, and activating strategies for sponsorship partnerships. So here we go. Whether it's football, rugby, or hockey, millions tune in to their television or pour into the stadiums every week to watch the big match. The ability of businesses and brands to harness the mass publicity of sporting events should therefore not be underestimated. Sport sponsorships can offer a variety of different avenues for businesses to get their names out to the public, including kid sponsorships, match day sponsorships, or stadium naming rights. Sponsorship can be defined as the acquisition of rights following a monetary compensation in goods and or services deriving from the affiliation or association with a product, with a team, with an organization, or with an event, with the aim of getting economic, marketing, or image benefits from such affiliation or association. Some of the main benefits of sponsorship agreements are increased media exposure. As social media and streaming services continue to expand and develop, the opportunity for brand exposure will continue to grow. Brand awareness. Increasing awareness of a corporate image or brand is the main purpose and goal of sponsorship. Greater attention will equate to greater familiarity and association. Increased profits. Effective marketing can make the difference in scoring a successful sales drive. Businesses can use sponsorship to promote new or emerging products. There are terms of a sponsorship agreement. With that, sponsorship fees. One of the main terms of sponsorship agreement is a sponsorship fee and how much the brand exposure will cost. The sponsorship fee may be as simple as an agreed fixed upon price for the term of the agreement. However, the fee could also be in the form of variable payments or be linked to income targets. This will largely depend on negotiation between the parties to the agreement. Cost is an important consideration for businesses, and the payable fees will have to be weighed and valued against the likelihood of recouping monies through increased sales. A sponsor should consider whether to opt for a sponsorship fee which is increased yearly as part of a multi-year deal, or for a sponsorship fee which is to be linked to the performance of the team in question. For example, would there be a significant hike in the agreed fees if the sponsored team was promoted or won a trophy? The sponsorship rights are a substantial part of the sponsorship agreement, and the sponsor should ensure that these rights cover comprehensively and accurately all the main benefits the sponsor can receive. An important consideration should be the level of exclusivity that the sponsor is getting. For example, a sole and exclusive sponsorship deal with a sports club is likely to lead to a much greater awareness and presence than a multi-party sponsorship agreement would bring. Although exclusivity may come at a higher price, a sponsor will want to include in the agreement its right to promote or advertise its business at events and the extent to which it can do this. In terms of venues, the rights to signage or the display of visual graphics that communicate information to the public could be an important advertising tool, not only to fans at the stadium, but also to the wider public if the event is being broadcasted on television. Similarly, the agreement could include a right to display the brand on the kit itself. The intellectual property rights are a well-drafted sponsorship agreement should deal with the intellectual property rights of both parties, making clear which party owns these rights. Rights and remedies should be included in the agreement to ensure that each party is protected against loss or damage arising from the trademark or copyright infringement. The sponsorship will want to protect any goodwill associated with its brand by ensuring such brand is used or displayed in the manner specified in the agreement. Also, it will want to prevent any passing off, which is where a business uses the reputation of another for its own benefit, usually to increase its own profits. In this context, the sponsor's relevant trademarks should be registered so that such trademarks are kept distinct and protected from those of the relevant clubs or teams. The sponsor will likely be required to afford protection to the sponsored group by giving a number of warranties, such as confirmation that the use of sponsors' branding or materials does not infringe in the intellectual property rights of a third party, that all its trademarks are fully registered, or that there are no other conflicting agreements. For example, if the club or team have already entered into an exclusive sponsorship agreement with another brand. And the duration of the sponsorship. A sponsor should consider the length of the sponsorship agreement. If, for example, the sports team or club in question is on an upwards trajectory, a multi-year deal could be an important asset to the sponsor. However, the sports team may not do as well as expected, and the sponsorship fee may not justify the advertising, or circumstances may arise which cause the sponsorship arrangement to have a negative impact on the sponsor. Therefore, appropriate termination provisions should be specified in the agreement so that the sponsor can have an escape route. So sponsorship rights can unlock the gates to a wave of publicity and media attention. Sponsorship may be used by all types of businesses, whether they choose to contract with a local or small sports team promoting brand awareness in a small geographical location, or with a larger sports club with broadcasting rights and exposure on a national level. Sponsorship can take a variety of forms, be it stadium naming rights, kit sponsorship, or player or match day ball sponsorship. Sponsorship agreements should always be tailored to suit the needs of the individual business. The global sports sponsorship market was worth an estimated $57 billion US in 2020 and is expected to grow to almost $90 billion US by 2027. The industries responsible for generating the largest revenue within sports sponsorship include financial services, technology, and the automotive industry. On a regional level, North America generated over a third of global sports sponsorship revenue. In 2020, owing to its hugely commercial, successful professional leagues such as the NBA and the NFL. Given the commercial success of North America's sports leagues, it comes as no surprise that some of the most valuable sports teams worldwide are American franchises. At the top of the pile are the NFL's Dallas Cowboys, whose brand value in 2021 amounted to $5.7 billion US. As a league, the NFL's sponsorship revenue amounted to $1.62 billion US in 2021, representing an almost twofold increase since 2010. The National Basketball Association has seen its sponsorship revenue follow a similar upward trend, reaching $1.46 billion US in the 2021 season. A newer member of the sports sponsorship game is esports. This is certainly a growing market for advertisers and sponsors to tap into, as esports market revenue is forecasted to exceed $1.62 billion US by 2024. Moreover, revenue from esports sponsorship and media rights reached $822 million US in 2020 and is forecast to grow another 50% by 2023. Some of the main industries already investing sponsorship money in esports include consumer goods, technology, and clothing. National, large, regional, small regional, large local, and small local national level sports involve interest from one or possibly two countries, such as the Super Bowl or the World Series. These events have national television coverage, as well as spectators who travel from around the country and are not necessarily focused on the host city. The most frequently cited reasons for sponsoring regional sports events were to give back to the community and to obtain media exposure or publicity. Good corporate citizenship, which can be likened to giving back to the community, was the most frequently cited reason to sponsor regional sport events. Small-scale sponsorship can encourage people, and especially amateurs, to participate in sporting events in regional or local communities, including many first-time participants. Regional organizations or events are more geographically limited. This may include individual professional teams such as the Atlanta Falcons of the National Football League, or college teams like the Ohio State University. Local teams have the narrowest geographic focus, usually a city or community, and usually appeal to a specific segment in the area, such as high school sports and minor league sport. Research to date agrees that sport events are social spheres where value co-creation happens through complex dynamic associations among networks of consumers, producers, and resources. Sport sponsorship is seen as a powerful tool for brand communication. Sport sponsorship is an investment in a sports entity, an athlete, a league, or event, to achieve a company's marketing goals or promotional strategies. A large body of literature supports the arguments that sports sponsorship can improve corporate image and enhance consumers' purchase intention regarding the sponsoring brand. Consumer involvement and experiences of sports sponsorship events can increase public awareness, enhance the sponsoring company's brand equity, and encourage consumers' future consumption. However, Mount Ainiro in 1995 pointed out that small-scale sponsorship often emphasizes its impact on consumer feedback and the success of the sponsored events to measure the effectiveness of the sponsorship. Sponsorship activation can't be defined by any one single act. Instead, it encompasses the entire sponsorship experience based on the agreement between the rights holder and the sponsor. It takes the assets a sponsor buys from you and sets those assets in motion. That means it can take many different forms and see many different results based on the level of sponsorship and what that sponsorship packet includes. Signing a sports sponsorship contract with a team, club, and athlete or an event is just the first step in a much more complex and rounded program. Yes, because brand exposure by itself cannot work effectively, you must try in every possible way to exploit the sponsorship and decline it to its fullest. It's what we call a sports sponsorship activation or sponsor activation. You need to start thinking about how you're going to activate it. That means how you're going to deploy it so to ensure you will reach and connect with your target in the most effective way and that it be remembered. One of the reasons it can be difficult to clearly differentiate the levels is due to the marketing activation process. A company buying at a national level will want to create platforms for activation down through even to specific local areas. Simply running a national television advertisement is not enough to engage consumers with the products or develop more personal relationships with them. Sports can be useful for these levels of activation. You never have a shortage of creative inventory and thinking. This is especially true in a competitive market space where you are up against all the big boys of the NBA, MLB, NHL, and NFL. You must be able to differentiate your property and the value of your brand with new, creative ways to drive value to a brand or sponsor. The NBA has reconfigured arenas to accommodate added sponsorship inventory, including tarps bearing sponsor logos across lower bowl seating areas, camera visible LED light signage around the court, and highly visible baseline apron signage. Teams will control the tarp signage as a local inventory, but the league will control it for national broadcasts and will not put ads on the tarps. Instead, team and league branding will be featured on the tarps for national games. The league also has allowed activation areas and spaces that typically would be occupied by valuable lower level seats to allow things like auto sponsors to display their latest models proximate to the court. Case in point, the Texas Legends, which is a D-League basketball team, were brainstorming with one of their existing sponsors, Kia Motors America, and Central Kia dealerships. They were challenged with coming up with a way to get them bigger and better inventory and provide a more commanding brand visible platform, even though all of the premium court inventory was sold out. When an existing sponsor is telling you that they want to spend more money with you and asking how they can spend it, you find a way. Facility naming rights, such as the perimeter advertising logo placement around and throughout the facility and handout materials, as well as facility signage. You can see here that Kia, they hung a Kia vehicle from the ceiling in order to accommodate the increase in sponsorship level. Understanding one's own sport is critical to then be able to establish the best sponsorship fit. Then it's possible to identify companies that match in the way that the property can positively impact their business model. Who values your market is a question to ask. Partnering with a sports property is a super exciting thing to do. Agencies and operators tend to focus on the effectiveness and accuracy of the program. Sponsorship programs today are and must be three-dimensional communication campaigns, strongly rooted in the brand's vision and mission with a complex array of activations carefully targeted. You should research organizations to determine if it's a good fit with the following information. What are the client's goals, both on the commercial and marketing front? What are the company's values, their mission, their vision, and legacy? And what are the features of their products and services that they're trying to convey? What are the territories the company is targeting? And what is their target audience and buying persona? What is the time frame for the project, and has the client ever been involved in a sports marketing project before? Does the client have a dedicated team to follow this campaign, both from the office and on the field? And who is making a decision on the subject? What is the allocated total budget for this activity? Building the right proposal means giving the client what they need. Sponsorship in this day and age is a million miles away from standard packages and pre-batched solutions. So each and every proposal must be tailor-made and custom around the client's goals and features. Flexibility is the name of the game, and crafting the perfect balance between visibility, social media support, photo ops, athlete appearances, video shootings, and so on and so forth truly is a form of art. As a rule of thumb, always make sure you have several tiers of opportunities. The bottom one being the exact budget, goals, and timings the client has asked for in the first place. From that, you can show them what happens if they add that money or that year of contract, and it'll be easier for them to get the bigger. When drafting a sports marketing project, sports sponsorship agencies and professionals know timing is key. There is a huge difference between getting started in season, before the season, or after the season. Different sports have different calendars, and while November might be the perfect month to sign a MotoGP partnership deal, it would be little late for anything related to football or basketball. The seasons of both starting at the end of the summer. This has a lot to do with how long does it take for a client to sign that proposal and approving the sponsorship project. Newbies might be scared to push for a quicker response, but experts know it's a fine line between being on time and a little too late. The exclusivity clause means that the party cannot get any other sponsor for the event. This clause gives an advantage to the sponsors for being an exclusive sponsor for the whole event. If this clause is in the sponsorship agreement, you must read it carefully. While the primary role of sponsorship agreement is to document the deal arrived at, the process of negotiating and finalizing the agreement sometimes also irons out the parties' understandings, which may have previously been inaccurate or incomplete. Therefore, a well-conceived negotiation process can play an important role in a mutually satisfactory outcome. Broadly speaking, a sports sponsorship agreement could be a sponsorship of an individual sports person, again, the sponsorship of a team, organization, and the sponsorship of an event. Though some details will differ, there is a significant overlap in the key issues to be considered. Negotiating a comprehensive sponsorship agreement requires attention to detail, commercial awareness, and a knowledge of contract, intellectual property, and other laws. The anatomy of the sponsorship agreement under question will depend on the nature and purpose of the proposed action. Having a well thought through and carefully drafted sponsorship agreement, which contains comprehensive rights and obligations of both parties, can help parties understand the deal with certainty and to evaluate their options and continuing rights without dispute or further debate. That said, it is possible that circumstances change and relationships in place to resolve irremediable disagreements. Every contract, including a sponsorship agreement, should clearly identify all parties to the agreement along with their individual corporate status. Any other identifying information in their registered or mailing address, this is usually set out at the beginning of the agreement. This is of particular significance in multi-party agreements that include an intermediary, such as a player agent or marketing representative, as this forms the basis for structuring the relative obligations and responsibilities of the parties among themselves. Typically, a sponsorship agreement will list a number of standard miscellaneous provisions that constitute an important part of any contract. Prominently, sponsorship rights may include pouring serving rights for a beverage or hospitality and company, rights to individual player appearances and endorsements, rights to player images, rights to use logos and general sponsorship designations such as the official sponsor of XYZ, promotional and advertising rights across media, and rights to display logos on team and replica apparel, as well as rights to name the team or the event, such as the Champions League 2020, rights to branding and visibility at venues, including perimeter signage, rights to match tickets, and rights to in-stadium hospitality, on-air rights, etc., etc. It should also be made clear in this section of the agreement whether the rights granted are exclusive in nature. For instance, as Company A, the only company whose logo will appear on the team jersey, and if so, this exclusivity must be noted in the contract. For instance, only a beverage manufacturer can ask for and be granted pouring rights at an event, or a hospitality provider can request exclusive serving rights in a stadium. Suffice it to say, this is extremely important that the sponsor considers in detail the benefits it wishes to receive, and the party granting these rights understands what it is granting, and that these are documented with as much specificity and detail as possible. First right of refusal is a valuable defensive benefit for a sponsor, granting them the opportunity to review and take up new sponsorship at the end of the contract before it's offered to another competitor. The parties involved often assume that means it needs to be a similar offer to the one currently contracted, no matter how underpriced or badly structured it may be, or inappropriate it has become, making first right of refusal the sponsorship equivalent of a ball and chain. Thankfully, that's not actually true, and you don't have to live forever with a portfolio full of sponsorship mistakes. Right of first offer and right of first refusal and the right to match. These are a variety of provisions that encourage the parties to continue their relationship beyond the original scope, term, or territory. By virtue of legal precedent, the rights of the sponsor to make a first offer before any third party does, to have the right to match a third party's offer or any other similar right must be enjoyed during the term of the agreement and not post-termination and expiration thereof, while biasing the parties to continue their relationship. Provisions of this nature allow the sponsored party to go to the market for an independent financial valuation. These are often hotly contested provisions in a sponsorship agreement, as they somewhat limit the commercial behavior of the sponsored party in the future. At the same time, they can be valuable to sponsors that would like to establish long-term relationships and to sponsor entities that are not locked into long-term commercial terms with sponsors that are looking for long deals. When offering first right of refusal, you need to ensure that you specify a window for exclusive negotiations. That's a time frame during which you will only discuss this sponsorship with the current sponsor, not any of the other competitors. Work with your potential sponsor to determine how long it generally takes them to make a decision and put the end of that window far enough out from your event, season, whatever, that you're confident you can find a new sponsor if the renewal doesn't work out. The right of negotiation, or RON, is the same as the right of first negotiation, except the RON is not exclusive and does not give the sponsor a first priority in negotiation. Since the RON is nearly the functional equivalent of negotiating for the inventory on the open market, it has little economic value and is not customarily used. Sponsorship agreements are usually long and complex, as are many legal contracts. However, it is important that the thorough and detailed contract be drafted as soon so as to capture all the relevant rights and responsibilities of the parties in one document. Despite the apparent complexity of some sponsorship agreements, it is of fundamental importance that all parties are aware of the key provisions in the agreement. As such, having a sound understanding of the anatomy of a typical sponsorship agreement can be of great value when negotiating and for interpreting such an agreement. The choices can be overwhelming when you're just starting out with a small or new event, but the reputation of potential sponsors and their perspectives on events will determine what kind of partnership you'll ultimately have with them, and even how successful your event will be overall. Look for sponsors who understand the value of this type of sports sponsorship marketing. Whether they've sponsored an event before or not, it's still up to you to convince them that the investment will pay off no matter what. You should also look for sponsors whose audience matches yours in both demographics and interests. It's impossible to completely align with any one brand, but you can definitely pick out key areas worth highlighting during the event and stick to sponsors who share them. Sponsors focused on event ROI. Vanity sponsors like to stick their names on an event and call it a day, but to fully get the most out of the partnership, you'll want to reach out to companies who understand it's a two-way street. A sponsorship letter, which also sometimes goes by the name sponsorship proposal, is your effort to secure funding from your sponsor of choice. You're not asking for money, of course, but also dealing with what the cash would be used for while incentivizing the sponsor to consider giving. One situation in which you might opt to send a sponsorship letter is if you were hosting an event but needed fundraising. Through donations from one sponsor or several, you could afford to put on an event of the caliber that can drive your business forward. By promoting the sponsor throughout the event, such as with branding, booths, or even an interactive event, the sponsor gets to reap some benefits as well. The sponsorship request letter doesn't make the sale, it's you. If your first point of contact with the sponsor is writing them a sponsorship request letter, your chances of success are very low. It is incredibly important to involve your sponsors in the process of building a request letter or a sponsorship proposal. You can use the sponsorship letter to grab their attention, warm up a call, or better yet, to summarize the results of a recent meeting before moving to a full proposal. I think a letter makes more sense as a starting point than a full proposal, but nothing beats a quick phone call or short email to a sponsor to understand their needs before writing anything. As a last resort, a sponsorship request letter can help open doors, but you have to do it properly. The basic components of a sponsorship letter are as follows. First, you want to start out with an introduction to yourself and your opportunity, the reason you got in touch, the information about your audience, your activation and sponsorship opportunities, and a mention of when you will follow up. Briefly describe who you are with a sentence or two about your organization. Less is more here. Why did you choose their company in particular? Do you know someone who suggested that you connect? This is the place to mention your mutual contact's name and why they thought the two of you should meet. What is it about the potential sponsor's corporate goals that line up with yours? Do they have a history of sponsoring opportunities like yours? Do you offer access to an audience they've indicated is important to them? Is the main contact involved in organizations like yours? This is where you show them you've done your homework and that they are not just one of thousands of letters you are firing out the door. Give information about your audience. This is your opportunity to stand out. Sponsorship is all about marketing and sales, and both require a target customer to work. Do you know your prospect's target customer? Here is where you prove it. I'm not talking about basic demographic information here or sweeping generalizations like middle-class families. I'm referring to data that describes who your audience is, why they are involved with your organization, the types of purchases they plan to make, and data related specifically to your prospect. Do they buy your prospect's product already? Can you help your prospect sell more product or keep current customers? Most sponsorship seekers leave audience data out completely, hoping their prospects will be impressed by their cause or by the prestige of their brand alone. Yet, without audience data, you look just like every other proposal that lands on their desk. Not sure who your audience is? Then you want to make sure and check out your audience data and sponsorship. Your activation opportunities. You need a refresher on activation. Then craving some inspiration to build up some cool activation ideas. Instead of focusing on how much money you want from your sponsor, use your sponsorship letter to show your prospect that you understand how sponsorship works. Give them 3 examples of activation ideas that your sponsors and your audience love. Show them the types of outcomes you can offer them, like branding, sampling, product placements, and contests. Be specific and clear about the way you work with sponsors and how sponsors can add value to your audience, who is also their target customer. A mention of when you'll follow up. Let your prospect know you plan to follow up and be specific on when. Tell them you're going to call them on a certain date and time, or that you plan to stop by their office on a specific date to say hi. At that time, you can clue them in that you would love to learn more about their goals and how you can work together. When you tell your prospect you plan to follow up, you're showing them you're serious about working together. Then add your contact information and invite them to get in touch if the above times don't suit them. Faced with an impending meeting with a sponsorship seeker, more often than not, your sponsor will follow up with you first. It may be to tell you no thanks, or it could be to learn more about your audience and the cool activation ideas you featured in your letter. Either way, a yes or no is better than silence, requiring you to follow up forever. There are 2 main categories under which an array of objectives can be housed: direct and indirect. Direct objectives are intended to drive immediate sales. These objectives may provide an opportunity to quantify revenue. The sponsorship relationship with the sports organization can create direct cash flow by collaborating with sponsors. In the context of sports sponsorship, direct functions of sponsorship relationships are linked to cash flow for the event generated from sponsorship rights fees. Indirect objectives are the larger group of ways to utilize sports sponsorship to achieve desired results, including influencing brand awareness, brand attitudes, and brand image. Objectives of this nature will take time to execute and can be difficult to establish clear returns with standard measurement tools. Indirect objectives add value to the sports event and its sponsorship program more long term. Both direct and indirect value creating functions of sponsors, however, need to be considered in order to develop a sustainable competitive advantage in the sponsorship market and in order to exploit fully potential resource contributions of sponsors. Indirect functions of sponsorship relationships are linked to access to new markets, specialized skills, complementary marketing investments, and connections with new sponsors, as well as service innovations. So the university is actually a sponsor of the American Heart Walk. We have been for quite a few years now, and you can see here, this is the Islanders team where we've come together and partnered with the American Heart Association with their mission, and they are also a big supporter of our mission as well. We work together with different events like the Heart Walk, but also especially with sport management, offering opportunities for interns and practicum students and things along that line. The agreement after a sponsor and a property have determined they will be a good fit, the documentation and literal agreement must be created. These will vary largely across the national recreation and leisure levels. It is, of course, necessary to establish a commercial agreement with the possibility to promote the connection the identification between the values of a sports subject and a sponsor's entity in the awareness of the public. The substance of the contract is strictly dependent on the sponsorship property. The main aim is the transfer of that sponsored party intellectual right or image to the sponsor, and the right to the use of the name of the sponsored party. The rights coming out of the sponsorship property and which are transferred to the sponsor are the most typical and significant characteristics of a sponsorship agreement. The aim of the sponsor is to take the advantage of the goodwill associated with the particular sporting property that is being sponsored. There are certain areas that should be included at each level. The sponsorship contracts are complex as they consist of many different activities which are supposed to assist the principal core of the contract, with the aim to optimally emphasize the commercial benefits of the agreement. It is, of course, necessary to establish a commercial agreement with the possibility to promote that connection, the identification between the value of a sports subject and a sports entity in the awareness of the public. Both properties try to achieve the public awareness of a close connection between them and look forward for common mutual benefit. The common aim of both parties is to increase the value of the sponsorship property, and they work together to achieve this common task. Here you see, this is the Heart Walk again, and the sponsorship that we have. We get our choice of, it's a selfie station and a different station. We've chosen the selfie station, and you can see we have the little selfie frame along with the Texas A&M logo on the frame. And we have a great backdrop there with some Islanders there to support. So it's a great partnership. Some other considerations with the sponsorship agreement are to determine and define the length of the contract, which must be clear. For example, January 1st to December 31st. Benefits to the sponsor should be outlined. This may be challenging and focus mainly on the inventory being purchased, such as signage placement and media inclusion. The agreement payment obligations of the sponsor. This is the agreed upon price along with how to provide payment and repercussions for late payments. The type of capital exchange should be considered and outlined as well, whether that's monetary and or in kind, where they're giving things to give away. Contingency plans resulting in the partnership not taking place, termination, or an event not taking place are some other considerations. We'll talk about those in just a moment. A licensing agreement is applicable for some sponsorship contracts which are based on intellectual property, such as the image of the Olympic rings as a world famous trademark makes the essence of the contract in a way in which it looks as if it were a licensing agreement. Contingency plans resulting in the partnership not taking place, termination, or an event not taking place. There are two categories for this. The sponsorship contract must include an indemnification clause wherein they agree to pay the other party any loss suffered due to the negligence, misconduct, or any omission on the part of another. It is a key remedy that provides numerous benefits in case the party suffers a loss. The procedures and conditions for indemnification must be clear to avoid delays and conflicts. It is also important to limit the indemnification so as to protect the parties from exploitation. Indemnification notes that legal action can occur when a party is at fault, resulting in possible financial losses. Force majeure is the termination of agreement upon even cancellation when neither party is considered to be at fault due to causes beyond either party's control. This clause is an utmost necessary clause in the sponsorship agreement. Sometimes the lawyers forget to include the clause or do not bother to read the clause carefully, which leads to many problems in the future. So it is essential that the clause is thoroughly read by both parties. The clause helps parties to free from the liability to pay for the loss in case of an act of God or other external force that cannot be foreseen. The common examples are earthquakes, wars or riots, terrorist attacks, strikes, or any change in the law. The clause also gives parties the right to terminate the contract in case the force majeure event prolongs or extends for a certain period. A dispute resolution provision is very important and should not be missed in the contract, as it outlines how the parties would resolve a dispute which may arise during the event or in the future. It is a very common clause that most of the lawyers forget to include in the contract. It states that in the case of any dispute between the parties, which course should be taken, whether they should go for negotiation, litigation, arbitration, or mediation. The rules must be set out with the agreement of both parties. Sometimes it happens that the sponsors only give their brand name and are not physically present in the event, as they are from different countries or states. If any issue arises, it is important to outline the laws which govern the contract. It is also important to identify the jurisdiction where the proceeding will be initiated. If there is a jurisdiction clause in the agreement, parties can quickly initiate the proceedings without any delay. And a few other tips to avoid conflicts with your sponsors. You should agree on the terms of sponsorship with your sponsors in advance, because if you do it in haste, you may forget some important terms which can create issues later. You need to keep your sponsors updated and provide all the news, developments, and news of the changes in the event. Make sure that you have a written agreement with proper registration and stamp duty paid. Clarify all the rights and obligations in the contract to avoid confusion. So definitions and interpretations. Most contracts will set out a list of definitions in order to establish or clarify the meaning of important terms in the contract. As the terms defined in this section appear throughout the remainder of the contract, they are usually capitalized. This should prompt the reader to cross-check the meaning of the word in the definition section each time it is used in the agreement, as the entire meaning thereof, with limitations and exceptions, is imported into the provision in which it's used. The term. This provision will describe the duration of the agreement, the length of the time that the parties agree to be legally bound. The term is usually the length of the tournament or event, or alternatively a specified number of months or even years. It should be noted that while the sponsorship agreement will cease at the end of the term, there are usually a number of provisions that will survive the termination or cessation of the contract. For example, confidentiality clauses or cooling off periods, etc. It is possible that there could be an initial term which could be renewed via one or more mechanisms, including the notification of one of the parties, the mutual agreement of the parties, and so forth. In the case of the extension, the extended term is considered the term of the agreement. The territory. This provision will describe the geographic location within which the agreement is relevant, and within which the parties perform the obligations as well as enjoy their rights under the agreement. This can be a particular city, state, country, region, or even the entire world. Along with the provision on term, the provision on territory places explicit limitations on the tenure, extent, and scope of the rights and obligations created under the agreement. Consideration. This section on consideration must clearly indicate the nature, quantum, method, and schedule of payments. The sponsorship, licensing fees, and royalties, cash or value in kind, a lump sum payment or installment payment, whether they will be a minimum guarantee, etc. It should also clearly indicate what interest rate will be applicable in the event of late payment. Your categories. This provision describes the sponsor's product or service categories that will be endorsed or may be associated by virtue of the sponsorship agreement. The proper definition of this category also has an impact on the scope of the sponsor's exclusivity, a common sponsor demand. It is important to accurately define the category, as potentially there may be a myriad of subcategories to be sponsored within a general category, each capable of exclusivity. As illustrated, it is possible for the same entity to be sponsored by a mobile service provider, a manufacturer of mobile phones, and a manufacturer of mobile accessories, and yet provide each of them category exclusivity. Exclusivity is an official association with a sporting event by an organization at the exclusion of other organizations. Organizations that wish to obtain such affiliation with sporting events generally have to pay a lot of money for the privilege. The more prestigious the event, the more the organization will have to pay. The rights will almost always go to the organization willing to pay the most amount of money. This sum is often very substantial. Termination and its consequences. Every contract will usually set out under what circumstances it can be terminated prior to the expiry of the term. That is, a contract will generally come to an end when it is considered to be fully performed or when it comes to the end of its term. However, usually if there is a material breach of the sponsorship agreement, the party which breaches the agreement may be considered to have defaulted on their promise. Accordingly, the other party may be in a position to terminate the contract at their will. This may arise if the sponsor does not make a payment when it falls due, or if the party granting the rights does not properly deliver these rights to the sponsor. It is important to lay down the consequences of termination. Often, the consequences include proportioned payment or refund of the sponsorship fee, depending on the materiality and circumstances of the breach, such as cancellation of the event. Parties may even agree on a full refund. With respect to failure to pay sponsorship fees or royalties, a money suit is often the only available remedy after termination. In other cases of substantive deliverables, specific performance may be an alternative to be explored prior to termination. In essence, the consequences of termination could also serve as a deterrent to prevent either of the parties to the agreement from terminating the agreement for no good cause. It is also important to note that contract law does not favor penalties for breach that are unconnected to the actual loss or damage suffered, and therefore the nomination of liquidated penalty amounts, regardless of circumstances, is rarely recommended. Activation is the true engine of any sponsorship deal. The set of actions and tools devised to bring the project from the paper to the track must be in front and center in any sponsorship program. Activation is the portion of the sponsorship that engages with the fan, ideally with some sort of close interaction that enhances the fan's experience. What a sponsor does with and at the sport event or facility is vital to the entire relationship. A valid question to ask would be, who sets the objectives and implements the plans of action? The answer is not so simple. Sponsorship is but a set of rights you exchange for money or services. Leave it as it is and it'll hardly bring you any benefit. How you turn those benefits in something tangible and profitable is paramount. And there are a billion examples of great activation strategies, from hospitality programs to PR operations, from social media storytelling to contests and raffles. A word of caution though, activation strategies won't come free and are not included in the sponsorship contract, meaning the client will have to pay for each and every one of them. Again, as a rule of thumb, for each dollar spent in sponsorship, consider spending $1,000 in activation. The sponsors must know their own objectives and what they want from their property. It is a sport event manager's responsibility to lead the way with helping the corporate sponsors in doing just this. It is not just to provide a list of inventory, but to help them understand how and why for activation. When making recommendations for successful activation, the sport property should pay careful attention and involvement of the sponsor organization on site, as well as the types of activities offered. Finally, reporting. Reporting is an area too often overlooked in sports sponsorship, and one that in the past was connected to some senseless innuendos, such as you can't actually measure sponsorship. Truth is, you can with exquisite precision. Tools and strategies are in place to calculate exact return on investment, returns on objectives, and other metrics. Technology allows for perfect on-screen exposition measurement, and the internet is nothing short of data on engagement, audiences, and penetration. Measuring the sponsorship benefits allow for finer tuning and for higher accountability, while of course letting you appreciate the great benefits of a well-designed sports marketing program. And these are my references. Thank you for joining me today. I look forward to talking with you again. Have a great day.